I'm here with Evelyn Imperato, and we are sitting by the shore of Canandaigua Lake, where she created an absolutely magnificent piece of work that we'll be talking about. In early 2012, the HHS mandate promulgated by the U.S. government interfered with and attempted to manipulate the rights of conscience of many people. The Catholic Church in particular stood up to that as a matter of freedom of religion and the conscience that underlies our freedom of religion. The bishops who are united in the United States Conference for Catholic Bishops called for 2 different marches, which Evie and I both participated in with hundreds of other people, and they also called for a unique 2 weeks from June 21st, 2012 to and through the 4th of July in order to learn, to pray, to share the experiences and stand up for our right for religious freedom. Throughout the United States, in most dioceses, events were held. 1 event, 2 events, maybe a few more. But in Canandaigua, New York, at the Notre Dame Retreat House, which, by the way, is right across the lake from where we're sitting at the moment, there was a 2-week event that more than 500 people attended, either all, as Evie did, or various pieces of those events. Nationwide, well-known speakers came in, and the program was one of outstanding explanation, teaching. There was prayer, adoration, and some unique events held as well. Unique is the word that we have to focus on now, because Evie was the person who created a unique, even to use the word quilt, understates the magnificence of what she did, and in a very short time. But I'm going to let Evie speak for herself. And Evie, my first question to you is, how did you decide to do this, and why did you make such a unique effort?
Well, prior to this particular effort, I had wanted to do a quilt of valor coming up for Memorial Day instead of flowers or 9-point and whatnot that our quilt group had been doing every year for St. Mary's. And we were at a group, and I suggested it, and they, well, yeah, that sounds like a good idea, but why don't you go ahead and do it? You know, we're going to do other things. I said, And at that, one of the girls' homes was a Fons and Porter magazine, quilt magazine, with a quilt draped over a rocking chair, and it caught my eye. And I said, that's exactly what I'm talking about. That's beautiful. And it's called The 3 Tours. And it was designed by a Tony Jacobson from Iowa, who was a quilter and designer. And it was in honor of his nephew, who had done 3 tours, 1 in Iraq and 2 in Afghanistan. And he came home, and he wanted to recognize his service. And I said, this is wonderful. And one of the girls offered to copy the directions for me, because it was a new magazine, and she wanted it. And I came home and immediately started working on it. And in 1 week, I had the top done, and then quilted it, or pinned it and whatnot, then took it to the quilter by the 3rd week, and then 2 days later took it to deposit. And the Quilt of Valor went to my nephew, who had been asked to be guest speaker on Memorial Day in my hometown of Deposit, New York, in memory of his father, Paul Raymond, my brother, who was a pilot in the Air Force and was lost in Vietnam September 5th, 1967. And it was thrilling, number one, to have completed it in that amount of time, and then to patiently wait till all the ceremonies were over and presented at a luncheon the quilt to my nephew. It was such a great sense of satisfaction and thrilled, and the pressure was off. So we come home, and the following Sunday, Deacon Claude comes out of church, and he meets us in the parking lot, and he stopped his vehicle and said, "Ev, get your quilt girls together. We're going to have a quilting bee at the festival." And I said, "Really?" And he said, "Yeah." And I'm thinking, well, I don't know if everyone's aboard on that, but I'm thinking at the time it was going to be intense, and I'm thinking extension cords, how many, and what if it's rain or wind, and I have a very nice machine. I said, I don't think I'm taking that to Notre Dame every day and back home. I said, if you want a quilt, I'll make one. And he said, okay, and that was the beginning. We left that day to head to Ohio for a grandson's concert, and the very next day after that, I was shopping for fabric.
So are you saying that he asked that this be done and you took on such an enormous project? And how much time did you really have to do it? When did you start it?
Well, Fortnight began on the 21st, but the 8th we had the second silent march, the 8th of June, and I had 3 days where I got the thought with we the people because of the flyer that came out, and I immediately went and got the lettering and then embroidered it on the quilt, and I had just that, the We the People, and 4 lines when we started the silent march, and people were already signing up for the raffle, which was going to help defray costs of the fortnight. And then each day I added a little more, and maybe I had 8 or 10 rows done. And then each day I'd stay there all day and then come home and sew at night or early morning.
My recollection is of you being there every single day with the quilt and then grabbing people in between the speakers and the speakers themselves. And I was amazed, too, how people stood in line to sign that they really wanted to be associated with this statement that your quilt makes and with the project you were doing. How did you react to that?
Well, I thought it was fantastic, and it makes it all worthwhile. But at the same time, I'm thinking about people that I know, and people I know who love this country wouldn't sign it. They said, nope, I've signed enough things in my life, and they wouldn't sign it. So everyone who did was wonderful.
That's amazing that you say people who love their country, and yet some people wouldn't sign it. Why do you think they wouldn't sign it?
I think because they thought it was something against our standing president, and they voted for him, and we kept trying to say it's not about the contraception problem, it's about our freedom of religion and our freedom of free speech, which 2 of them had been signed away.
Do you think that there are people who simply don't understand what it is that our servicemen and women have died for in combat, that they either haven't been educated on it or they think it's all politics?
Well, I think they need to be reminded how many soldiers from the Revolutionary War on, World War I and World War II, who died to eliminate oppression of our freedoms, that we have the most incredible Constitution ever written, and it has stood for so long. And I just think they're letting today's time interests and their rights that they feel strongly just get in the way, and they're not seeing the big picture.
We were told by the bishops that this fortnight, these 2 weeks, was to be a time of learning and of education. And I think the quilt and your explanations to people was very much a part of their education. Did you find during that period of time that you were teaching as much as quilting?
Well, I didn't realize I was teaching, but I was learning a lot. And one in particular, which was very significant to me, was listening to Phil Gray speak. And what I came away with from his speaking was all about conscience. And that is why the top poster, which was a short poster on our silent marches, just became so important to me. And it's quoted from James Madison: "Conscience is the most sacred of all property."
That is an amazing quote, and it is so fundamental, isn't it, to all of the freedoms that we have under the Constitution. How do you exercise your freedoms if you don't first form your conscience?
Well, we've all heard about conscience, but the way he demonstrated it in the group brought it was like a child's explanation, but it hit home to everybody, where he led one of the attending members and part of the task force blindfolded through a maze of chairs, and just follow my voice, do you trust me, I won't hurt you, and yes, and he came through it all perfectly fine. Then he did it one more time, still did not unblindfold him, and turned him around a couple times and said, okay, we're going to try this again. And so everything was great, but now when he just started, he said, now I want the rest of you in the audience to give him directions too. And of course some were saying, okay, now do it back, turn around. And so he was getting all kinds of remarks, turn this way, turn that way. And Phil kept talking. And can you hear my voice? Yes. And he was talking low, and there was shouting. I couldn't hear, but from where I was in the back of the room. But apparently Joe did, and he got to the end, and it was fine. So now the blindfold is off, and then he says, now that conscience, that little voice that you heard was your conscience. And that's, the sort of the hair stands up on the back of your neck. He said, that's your conscience telling you what you're doing is not right. And if you listen to your conscience, you will be fine. And that's God talking to you.
And isn't that likely one of the big points that the bishops wanted to make to us through the experience, is that it's God's will that matters, it's God's word that matters, and it's the violation of conscience that no one should ever be asked to do.
So you put that so much nicer.
No, you said it perfectly from your experience. I guess I just want to reinforce it, because I think those who signed were saying that too. They were looking right at the top of the quote you had from James Madison, and the people who were willing to say, we the people, were accepting that message of conscience. And the number of people, I understand more people will even sign in the future. Mm-hmm. So there's...
We just haven't gotten to them
we
yet.
Haven't and I am sure you will. Now, I'd like to talk a little about the quilt itself and why you chose to do some things. I'm not even quite sure where to start, but you certainly have We the People from the preamble of the Constitution. And then it's People Today, and incredible number of names that were signed. Talk a little bit about the design and why you chose various elements of the design.
Well, when I started with the Constitution idea, I had to find fabric that looked like it might be parchment paper, and originally I was trying to find the one with the there's a style of printing that we had on one of our booklets from our silent marches, but I couldn't find the graphics for it like you would use with a broad ink pen and whatnot, calligraphy. Okay, that's what I'm trying to come up with. And when, right after Deacon Claude had mentioned this, I was on my way to Ohio, like I said. So one of my daughter's friends is a quilter. Her mother owns a quilt shop, but I didn't see her till on the way home. So she took me to quilt shops in Ohio, 2 of them. The first one, I found the beginning of the fabric, and then we went to a place called the Red Rooster, and we walked in through modern double glass doors and stepped into another world. And I just stood there with my mouth open and looked around this huge warehouse that was just stacked with fabrics and quilts and whatnot. And I heard from the background, "Yep, she's a newbie. She's never been here before." And we laughed. I said, it was amazing. So we just started going through. I said, I'm looking for patriotic fabrics. And I found several. And then I found different cream colors, and I wanted to give some texture to it so it wasn't just all plain. And I got various ones there. Most of this does come from this particular place.
So you bought a variety of fabrics, and then did you do the design after the fabrics, or did you do I'm sure people would be interested in how you went about it.
The design came as a result of the fabrics, but I just knew I wanted the Constitution. And one of the fabrics that I found there that's just one of the finest fabrics I have ever felt had the 1776 to 1876 fabric with the Liberty Bell and all the states at that time who were part of the Union. And the blues were perfect, and I had navy blue at home that I absolutely love, and I knew exactly that this was going to go down one side of it. And it's when you see the fabric you can picture where you want it. And then the opposing side, I said, well, you know, I just finished this quilt, the 3-tour Quilt of Valor, I call it the Quilt of Valor, that there were multiple stripes, red and white stripes, multiple double red, double whites, and 3 different blocks, quilting blocks that were part of each strip. And I said, that's going to counterbalance on the other side to never ever forget those who helped us gain our freedom. And that's very personal and as important as the Constitution in my mind.
It's the people who...
Yes.
Yes, it's the people. Now, you have... I'm going to stay on the main side, or the front side, for a few moments, and look at the various colors of, it's so hard to know where to start. You actually have excerpts of the Constitution, or the Declaration of Independence.
This was fabric that this woman had. Her name is Diana, who had 1 yard of this, fabric that was printed 2 to 3 years ago. And she was always going to do a table runner or something with it, but never had. And she said, I have 1 yard of this fabric. And when I saw it, I said, that's absolutely perfect. So of the different colors that are in this sort of faded picture is what I did to try to get fabrics that would go with this. And she said, I'll give it to you. And I said, well, no, I don't want to take the whole thing. I have 1 complete row of it, and then I have it scattered throughout. I said, 1/2 yard should be plenty, and it came exactly to 1/2 yard, and I gave her the 1/2 yard back, and she was here to help celebrate this. She came out with my daughter, and she was just nonplussed that she got her half of the Constitution fabric back, and that's what started it.
Wow, and then you've got that intermingled with various different colors, but all in a parchment theme.
And part of that, in fact, there are spots on some of the fabric to make it look old. And one of the women was about to sign, and she saw this spot that looked like a blood spot. She said, well, no, I'm not going to sign there. There's got blood on it. And I said, that's not blood, that's part of the design. And the whole back of it, when I was looking for something for the back, because this is going to be bigger than any width of fabric that I had, that the attendant, the clerk in the store said, well, I have this very wide fabric which is used for the backs of large quilts, and it was water stained, etc., in the design, and it was perfect for the back.
Okay. So you were fortunate to find, in a sense, both of those, but it's also your sense of the artistic that saw the possibility of putting those together.
Well, and part of the history is trying to remember 1776 for all those heroes. And I found fat quarters with different things, or it was the Great Reformation and Industrial Revolution, and there were parts of that, and I would take the border off, and that made our eagles at the top and the bottom, and there's our stars around. It looks sort of like metal work, like all the buildings erected, whatever. And then I came back home, and even in Joanne's, found stars that are very reminiscent that you see from 1776, and you can see the metal stars. They're often painted this way with the multiple colors, and so I wanted to represent both. And I happen to have had in my stash fabric that I was going to do my table runner, which gives the waving flag, the red and white, and I had the blue stars, and then that became our flag, and they're positioned to be equal with the blue star up in the corner, which means one flag was, and someone reminded me, well, this flag is backwards, and I said, yes, but in times of war, the flag does have the blue on the other side. And which I found out one time when someone had a flag hanging up at a storefront, and I was thinking, well, they've hung it backwards, and he said, no, in time of war it's hung like this. And we are at war in different parts of the world, and also if you stand at a flagpole, those on the other side of a flag that's waving sees it differently. So we've got it from both sides.
Perfect, and that really makes a huge statement as well. Now, you have a pattern here that it's very attractive, but you also told me it's very special. Tell us about that.
Well, when you have empty space on a quilt, you've got to quilt it somehow. and I'm just learning freestyle. This is my second time around. And I needed something that would be low but wide, and the fact that the loops come around, it's continuous sewing, but there's hearts. It loops around a heart and then goes to the next heart on the other side. And I said, yep, that's it. This is what it's going to be. So it just helps fill the voids instead of having, I've got enough straight lines, and just adding a little more texture and different looks in other places.
It's also reminiscent of the flourish by which some people signed the Declaration of Independence, and it's heart to heart. I can see that. Now, about these other stars, you have various sizes and colors, and the points and everything so perfectly made. Can you tell us a little about those?
Well, this was the design that Tony Jacobson had put his quilt together. They're basic squares. I don't know the particular names of these two, but you see them frequently. But in cutting all the pieces, it was a cafeteria tray full of little stacks of 4.5-inch squares, and there's 122 of the little tiny red triangles in that other one. And it took a whole day to cut all the pieces, but once you have the pieces, you can put them together fairly rapidly because you don't have to stop and change your tools and whatnot. And it was just trying to match the Constitution a little bit with the blue and the beige background of the blue, red, and white. And of course we try to carry the red, white, and blue. But that was trying to match this and the blues, but change the fabric so there's texture in different design. There's little sparkles in the points of the blue, and so it's just what catches the eye and what keeps the theme going.
Now, you chose another quote right here on the front, just below the original signatures, I'll say, because I know there will be more. Government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from the earth. And that was Abraham Lincoln's Gettysburg Address. So I'm going to ask you about quotes on the back as well. But this one must have been very special for you to put it right in with the signatures, because it is the people, isn't it?
Yes. What better one to do than the Constitution? I said, that goes on the front. It's got to be on the front. That's what started all this. And we've since heard from many different people and books that have been written about Abraham Lincoln, including the latest one by Bill O'Reilly, that felt he was the best president that we have ever had. And that's that important.
Wonderful. But before we turn it over, I want to ask you about the binding and what you might want to tell us about that.
Well, the binding, either you love it or you hate it. There are people who will do all the quilts and they'll give somebody else the job of doing the binding. For me, it's wonderful. I'm not bent over a machine or a table. I can sit in a chair, listen to television, and bind comfortably. And it's something that I've tried to do a binding where you don't see the stitches in the back. That's a sign of at least a good binder. And my mom did teach me how to do a binding on sewing, and different girls in my quilt group hate doing the binding, and very few of us do. And I said, fine, bring them on,
Well, good for you. The loving your work shows in its beauty. So now let's turn it over.
Okay.
So now we are looking at what you call the back side. On the other hand, anybody would be proud to call this the front side as well. And that magnificent eagle and the flag, and proud to be an American, as a real spotlight. And you've also got all of these quotes, and we'll come back to those and we'll talk more about those. But how did the design for the back evolve?
Well, again, back to the magazine with the 3-tour quilt. On the back cover was a picture of this fabric. It's called Stonehenge. And the colors just jumped out at me. And it had the eagle and proud to be an American. So I immediately went to my quilt shop and asked, did she have this fabric? I took the picture. And she said, no, but let me call the company. And she did, and they said, no, they don't have any right now. And very seldom do they reprint fabrics, that once it's there, and that's why people develop a stash, because if you see it, grab it, because it won't be there 3 months from now. And they said that that there was such a demand for this that they are doing a second printing, which is supposed to come out the end of August or early September. But they said, we will give you the names of shops who did purchase some of this, and maybe they have some left, which she did. And there was one in Marion, New York, and they had 2 of these center banners that came with the fabric. And on every piece of fabric, that the red and white and the blocks of red, white, and blue stars all come in bolts of fabric just like them. Even the blue is separate, the stars are separate, and you could get this whole banner that had everything. So she called up and they said, yes, we have 2 of the banners, but that's all we have left. And she said, well, could you mail them to me? And she said, yes. I drive home the next morning at 9 o'clock. I get a phone call, and she said, your 2 banners are here. She faxed them. She FedExed them overnight. And the next day I went and picked it up, and that became the center of the back. Now, none of the people at the Festival for Freedom ever saw this, but at the end of 14 days, the front was completed. And at the flag lowering that day, we presented it, and it was out in the parking lot, and the name was drawn for the raffle, and it was exciting. And I said, well, this is what's on the front. It explained what the front was about, but I said, on the back, it'll be a whole different thing, and many of our signs from our silent marches. So they've never seen the back.
Oh, how exciting. And I think for our listeners, we want to make the point that this was entirely a donation. of your time, of your work, of your materials, and a work of love. And that to even help out further, you donated this to the Festival for Freedom of St. Mary's Church so that the income from the raffle would also benefit defraying the expenses of the festival. So it's just amazing to think you've done all that, and now others will enjoy your work, but hopefully it will be in such a way that people can see it from time to time, can sign it from time to time, and can join on to the effort. Now, you've surrounded this by quotes, and you did mention in our marches we had signage, not political signage against any person or administration, but taking the best words that are in the history of our country. So I'm going to ask you to comment on some of those, and we know what's on the front is very special to you, but how about these? What are some of your favorites here?
Well, the one on the upper left, the ones that just seem to stand out is where the eye would catch it first. And the fact that they're not all people from the 1700s, but they are modern day people. And a quote from Pearl S. Buck: "None who have always been free can understand the terrible, fascinating power of the hope of freedom to those who are not free."
Powerful.
And it gives me chills every time I read it. You know, it's just. Isaac Walton: "The person that loses their conscience has nothing worth left keeping." That goes with the other conscience. It shows how many times it does come up. From Billy Graham, who I grew up with as a Protestant, and the framers of our Constitution meant we were to have freedom of religion, not freedom from religion. And this was from Pope Paul VI in 1965. "This right of the human person to religious freedom is to be recognized in the constitutional law wherever society is governed, and thus it is to become a civil right." This is a good one. This is from George Washington. "If the freedom of speech is taken away, then dumb and silent we may be led, like sheep to the slaughter." That was way back then.
Wow.
Edmund Burke: "Evil happens when good men, people, do nothing." And from the Star-Spangled Banner, the fourth stanza: "Praise the power that hath made and preserved us a nation." Cardinal Timothy Dolan, a little younger than George Washington: "When the government tampers with a freedom so fundamental to the life of our nation, one shudders to think what lies ahead." Pope John Paul II: "Religious freedom constitutes the very heart of human rights." From Jim Hightower: "The opposite for courage is not cowardice, it is conformity. Even a dead fish can go with the flow."
I know that one got a lot of laughs.
Well, but it gets the point across. And then the Holocaust Museum from Washington, D.C. Is so important. "Thou shalt not be a victim. Thou shalt not be a perpetrator. Above all, thou shalt not be a bystander."
Perfect. And that's what Stand Up for Freedom Fortnight was all about, not being bystanders.
And it's hard to stop. Martin Luther King Jr.: "Freedom is never voluntarily given by the oppressor. It must be demanded by the oppressed." Which then goes down to Nelson Mandela: "Real leaders must be ready to sacrifice all for the freedom of their people." Don't quote me on this one, but okay. Abraham Lincoln: "To sin by silence when they should protest makes cowards of men." Ronald Reagan. Freedom prospers when religion is vibrant and the rule of law under God is acknowledged. And finally, President Larry Arnn of Hillsdale College, Hillsdale, Michigan. Religious freedom is America's gift to the world and God's gift to man.
And isn't that point so important? Because we heard it so often from the speakers, that freedom of religion isn't coming from the Constitution, from the government, but instead comes from God, and it's the Constitution that guarantees and promises to protect our rights.
That one last quote that I had intended for the back, but I was running out of room. If I got any longer, I would never be able to hang it up. This is from Aristotle. The basis of a democratic state is liberty. And it's just how appropriate, and that over all the generations of these people, they're all saying the same thing, how important it is. So the piece that was intended is going to be framed, it's going to stay off the quilt, and I'll either make a pillow or frame it and maybe write around the outside with a fine pen what this came from.
Wonderful. Now, you did skip over, and I think it's very important, your the tag on the back that tells everybody about this purpose and what you've done. Why don't you read that for us, too?
Okay. And every quilt should have a label of where and why and who. Festival for Freedom, June 21st to July 4th, 2012, Notre Dame Retreat House, Canandaigua, New York, by, quote, Renewing Our Legacy, unquote, Task Force, Deacon Claudie Lester Chair, with participation of the Diocese of Rochester, Knights of Columbus, Station WHIC, 1460 AM. And, quote, We the people, empowered by our God-given freedoms preserved in the Constitution of the United States of America. Quilt designed and made by Evelyn E. Imperato, Canandaigua, New York.
Congratulations, Evie, on such a beautiful piece of work, and our gratitude for such a gift that you have given to people. It is so representative of what the fortnight was meant to be and what it achieved, and it's a centerpiece of that achievement.
Oh, praise God.
Praise God. And I will say, as we're sitting here, in the pictures have shown where Evie does her work for us, right across the way is the Notre Dame Retreat House. So as she was doing this work, she could see the site, and she's told me that some days, well, I'll let her tell.
Well, early morning, sometimes from 3 or 4 in the morning, and I was saying, oops, I'm not going to make the flag raising, but I would stop my ironing or sewing, and I would stand at attention with a pair of binoculars, and I would attend the flag raising and say the Pledge of Allegiance from my front room.
And from your heart.
Yes.
God bless you, Evie, and thank you very much.
No problem.
The tag on the back that tells everybody about this purpose and what you've done. Why don't you read that for us, too?
Okay. And every quilt should have a label of where and why and who. Festival for Freedom, June 21st to July 4th, 2012, Notre Dame Retreat House, Canandaigua, New York, by, quote, Renewing Our Legacy, unquote, Task Force, Deacon Claudie Lester Chair, with participation of the Diocese of Rochester, Knights of Columbus, Station WHIC, 1460 AM. And, quote, We the people, empowered by our God-given freedoms preserved in the Constitution of the United States of America. Quilt designed and made by Evelyn E. Imperato, Canandaigua, New York.
Congratulations, Evie, on such a beautiful piece of work, and our gratitude for such a gift that you have given to people. It is so representative of what the fortnight was meant to be and what it achieved, and it's a centerpiece of that achievement.
Oh, praise God.
Praise God. And I will say, as we're sitting here, in the pictures have shown where Evie does her work for us, right across the way is the Notre Dame Retreat House. So as she was doing this work, she could see the site, and she's told me that some days, well, I'll let her tell.
Well, early morning, sometimes from 3 or 4 in the morning, and I was saying, oops, I'm not going to make the flag raising, but I would stop my ironing or sewing, and I would stand at attention with a pair of binoculars, and I would attend the flag raising and say the Pledge of Allegiance from my front room.
And from your heart.
Yes.
God bless you, Evie, and thank you very much.
No problem.